Intro: 20 stars who were ahead of their time. What if the greatest tragedy in Hollywood isn't failure, but being right too soon? Behind the studio, lights and manicured smiles lies a quieter truth. For every star who was celebrated, there was one who spoke too early, challenged too loudly, or lived too freely. They weren't rebels without a cause. They were prophets without a pulpit, ignored, silenced, or erased, simply because they dared to outpace the era they were born into. Some pioneered film technique, others challenged gender roles, racial norms, or political silence. And when they did, the industry flinched. These weren't wild scandals. These were deliberate blindfolds, a refusal to look at the future when it was already knocking at the door. This is not a tale of trivia. It's a reckoning. A quiet march through the lives of 20 stars who didn't fit the mold because they were too busy building the next one. So before we begin, ask yourself, how many voices were buried not because they were wrong, but because the world wasn't ready to listen? And more importantly, are we still doing it today? Fact: Hasson, Hedy Lamarr. She gave the world Wi-Fi. Hollywood gave her silence. In the golden haze of 1,940 seconds Hollywood, Hedy Lamarr was known for one thing: beauty. She was the exotic seductress, the face that launched 1,000 promotional posters. But while audiences marveled at her looks, Lamarr was quietly revolutionizing technology. Alongside avant-garde composer George Antheil, she invented a frequency-hopping signal system intended to guide Allied torpedoes past Nazi interference. It was decades ahead of its time, so advanced that the US military shelved it. Her invention would later become the backbone of Wi-Fi and Bluetooth. Yet Hollywood never spoke of this. The studios saw her as a commodity, not a creator. Interviews focused on her figure, not her formulas. When she offered her invention, they told her to sell war bonds instead. She died nearly forgotten, her legacy rediscovered only by tech historians decades too late. The tragedy isn't that Hedy Lamarr was misunderstood. It's that she was deliberately underestimated. Fact: 2. Ida Lupino. She directed before she was allowed to. Ida Lupino didn't wait for history to catch up. She simply outran it. While still under contract as a studio actress, she studied directors on set, every lens, every cue, every shadow. And when the opportunity came, she stepped behind the camera and never looked back. In 1949, she directed Not Wanted, a film about unwed motherhood. The topic was taboo, the film was raw. Hollywood turned away, but Lupino kept going. She co-founded an independent production company, made films about sexual assault, mental illness, polio, and poverty decades before such issues became Oscar bait. The studio system didn't know what to do with her. They called her difficult. They called her niche. Today, she's remembered as the first woman to direct a film noir. Back then, she was a problem that wouldn't sit still. The industry didn't blacklist her. They just made sure she was always on the margin. Fact: 3. Anna May Wong. She was the future. Hollywood kept her in the past. Born in Los Angeles in 1905, Anna May Wong was the first Chinese-American movie star, fluent in English, Cantonese, and German, gifted, poised, magnetic on screen. But none of that mattered to a system built on exclusion. She was never offered leading roles, not ones that weren't drenched in stereotype. When MGM produced The Good Earth, a film about Chinese farmers, they cast white actors in yellowface. Wong was offered a supporting role as the villainous mistress. She declined with dignity and left for Europe, where she was finally treated like a star. In Paris and Berlin, she headlined films and theater. In Hollywood, she remained the outsider, both too Chinese and not Chinese enough. Wong spent her life bridging two worlds, yet belonged to neither. It wasn't until decades later that her contributions were finally recognized. She once said, "I am so tired of parts I have to play, where I come on, do a lot of screaming, and then die." It took nearly a century for Hollywood to stop writing roles that way. Fact: 4. Paul Robeson. He sang to the world and was silenced by his own country. Paul Robeson was a singer, actor, and orator with a voice that could move mountains. A Columbia-educated lawyer turned global icon, he lit up the screen and concert halls from New York to Moscow. But his greatest performance was not on stage, it was in defiance. Robeson dared to speak against lynching, against fascism, for workers' rights, for colonial liberation, for peace with the Soviet Union. At a time when Hollywood stars were expected to be silent mascots, he became a political lightning rod. The cost was staggering. His passport was revoked. His concerts were canceled. He was blacklisted by the studios and monitored by the FBI. Even his records vanished from store shelves. He became the ghost of a voice that once filled Carnegie Hall. Robeson never apologized. "The artist must take sides," he said. But Hollywood took the other side. Only now is he being remembered not as a threat, but as a pioneer who stood taller than the screens could contain. Fact #5. Marlene Dietrich. She didn't wear gender, she wore power. Long before the term non-binary entered public discourse, Marlene Dietrich blurred the lines with effortless defiance. In a tuxedo and top hat, she stalked onto the screen in Morocco, 1930, kissed a woman, and dared the audience to blink. Hollywood loved her, but cautiously. Her androgyny was tolerated as long as it remained exotic, European, and controllable. But Dietrich wasn't playing a part. She lived the ambiguity. Off-screen, she ignored conventions, affairs with men and women, political statements, a fierce anti-Nazi stance. She refused to return to Germany under Hitler. She performed for Allied troops on the front lines. And yet, her career dimmed as America moved toward post-war conformity. For decades, critics couldn't decide if she was an actress, a seductress, or a provocation. Today, she's a queer icon. Then, she was an elegant threat. Her image was always sharp. But what cut deeper was her refusal to apologize. Fact #6. Eartha Kitt. She asked one question, and Hollywood made her disappear. In 1968, during a White House luncheon, Eartha Kitt, glamorous, outspoken, and at the height of her fame, was asked about the Vietnam War. She didn't give a safe answer. She gave the truth. She said war destroyed communities, took sons from their mothers, and fueled anger back home. Lady Bird Johnson wept. The press turned. The punishment was swift. Overnight, Eartha Kitt was blacklisted not just in film, but on television, on stages, even in nightclubs. The woman who once played Catwoman with unapologetic fire was now persona non grata. Kitt moved to Europe to survive. She kept performing, kept challenging. Decades later, America welcomed her back older, wiser, unbroken. Her exile was never officially explained. But the message was clear. Hollywood could forgive almost anything except truth spoken at the wrong time. Fact #7. John Garfield. He fought the studios and lost more than a career. John Garfield wasn't supposed to challenge the system. He was a studio-made star, the kind you'd expect to fall in line. But Garfield had other ideas. He rejected the mold of the matinee idol, embracing roles that felt raw, working class, flawed. And when the studio tried to control him, he pushed back. He was one of the first to break away from the studio contract system, a dangerous move in the 1,940 seconds. But his biggest act of defiance came off-screen, refusing to name names during the HOAC hearings. He would not betray his friends. He would not play along. Hollywood punished him in silence. Offers stopped, doors closed, his name dimmed. Garfield died of a heart attack at 39. Some say it was pressure, some say it was heartbreak. Either way, he died fighting an industry that made him and then unmade him. His stand wasn't loud, but it echoed. Fact #8. Rosalind Russell. She proved women could be funny and smart, but the system didn't laugh. Rosalind Russell had timing, wit, and intelligence sharper than most of her male co-stars. She wasn't just playing the funny girl, she was crafting a whole new model for women on screen. In His Girl Friday, 1940, she delivered dialogue faster and funnier than Cary Grant. Critics were stunned, audiences were thrilled, but the industry hesitated. Comedy, they believed, was a man's domain. Women could be pretty, tragic, romantic, but not clever, in a way that threatened to outshine men. Russell kept pushing, starring in screwball comedies, playing strong-willed professionals and sharp-tongued journalists. Still, she never received the accolades she deserved. No Oscar, no industry-wide acclaim, just the label, too good for her time. Today, she's studied for her influence on modern female comedians. But back then, she was a challenge Hollywood didn't know how to frame. Fact #9. Sal Mineo. He came out before anyone was allowed to. Sal Mineo should have been the next James Dean. After Rebel Without a Cause, he was young Hollywood royalty. Sensitive, intense, adored by teens. But unlike most of his peers, Mineo didn't hide. He didn't play the game. He took queer-coded roles. He discussed sexuality when others whispered. He refused to marry for image, and Hollywood turned. The roles disappeared. He directed, wrote, hustled for stage work, but the cameras had moved on. For 2 decades, Mineo fought to stay relevant in an industry that labeled him too much of something they couldn't define. In 1976, just as his comeback was forming, he was murdered in an alleyway outside his apartment. His death was tragic. but his erasure had begun long before that night. Today, he's remembered as a pioneer of visibility. Then, he was simply gone. Fact: Hasson 0, Dorothy Dandridge. She broke the color line and hit an invisible wall. Dorothy Dandridge was everything Hollywood claimed to want: beauty, poise, talent. She sang like velvet and commanded the screen with regal force. In 1954, her role in Carmen Jones earned her an Academy Award nomination, the first for a black woman in a leading role. But the doors that opened led nowhere. She wasn't offered equal pay. Leading men wouldn't be cast opposite her unless the script made her suffer. She was too glamorous to play a maid, too black to play a romantic lead. When she tried to build her own production company, the studios ignored her. When she married a white man, the industry turned colder. Her career withered. By the 1,960 seconds, she was performing in nightclubs, barely holding on. She died in near poverty at 42. Dorothy Dandridge wasn't a cautionary tale. She was a victim of a system that demanded she rise just so it could remind her where she stood. Fact: Cancelletununo, Rita Moreno. She won the Oscar. Then Hollywood shut the door. When Rita Moreno won the Academy Award for West Side Story in 1962, she made history. It should have changed everything. It didn't. Instead of being offered stronger roles, she was sent the same scripts she'd rejected for years. Maids, sex workers, fiery Latinas. Hollywood had crowned her, then boxed her. For 7 years, she stopped taking film roles, not out of pride, but exhaustion. No matter how much talent she showed, the system kept asking her to shrink. Moreno fought back. She moved to theater, television, anything that let her stretch beyond the stereotypes. Slowly, over decades, she rebuilt her narrative. She became an EGOT winner, an icon, but the industry's delay in recognizing her was no accident. It was design. She once said, "I wanted to be seen as a human being, not an accent." And for far too long, that was too much to ask. Fact: Hasson 2, Harry Belafonte. He was the voice of a generation and the conscience Hollywood didn't want. Harry Belafonte wasn't just a star, he was a movement. With Deo, he became a pop sensation. With Carmen Jones, a film star. But fame wasn't enough. Belafonte used his voice for civil rights, marching with Dr. King, challenging U.S. policy, funding voter registration drives in the Deep South. Hollywood noticed and recoiled. Producers called him too political. Studios stopped casting him. Networks hesitated to air his appearances. At the height of his career, he was deemed a liability. But Belafonte never retreated. He believed art was inseparable from justice. He used his platform not for survival, but for change. His legacy today is monumental. But for decades, Hollywood made him pay for asking questions it preferred to ignore. The spotlight was bright until he aimed it back at them. Fact: Hasson 3, Thelma Ritter. She never played the leading lady. She didn't have to. In an industry obsessed with glamour, Thelma Ritter was the antithesis of a starlet. Middle-aged, sharp-tongued, wrinkled, and proud of it. She wasn't cast for beauty, she was cast because no one delivered truth quite like she did. From All About Eve to Rear Window, Ritter became the voice of reason in films drowning in illusion. Her roles were small, but unforgettable. She spoke the audience's thoughts, cut through the nonsense, and stole scenes from stars with just one line. Hollywood never quite knew what to do with her. She was nominated for 6 Academy Awards. She never won. She wasn't bankable, they said. She wasn't marketable. But audiences loved her. Actors revered her. And without her, the golden age would have felt hollow. Thelma Ritter didn't chase fame. She made honesty her brand and left the leading ladies in her dust. Fact: Hasson 4, Diana Sands. She shattered Broadway ceilings, but Hollywood barely noticed. Before diversity was a buzzword, Diana Sands was already rewriting the rules. Her performance in A Raisin in the Sun stunned critics. But it was her casting in The Owl and the Pussycat opposite a white romantic lead that made history. Then, silence. Studios panicked. White audiences weren't ready. Producers recast the role with Barbra Streisand. Sands returned to the stage, where she earned ovations but little industry power. Her talent was undeniable. Her presence? Unapologetic. She carried herself with the poise of someone who knew she was making space for others even if she wasn't allowed to stay. Sands died of cancer at 39 with a career full of what-ifs. She wasn't rejected because she lacked brilliance. She was rejected because her brilliance arrived before the world could accept it. Fact: Hasson 5, Roddy McDowall. He archived the history others tried to forget. Roddy McDowall was a child star, a character actor, and a quiet rebel. While others sought fame, he collected moments, scripts, film reels, contact sheets, behind-the-scenes footage. He saved everything Hollywood was too careless to preserve. His private archive became one of the most comprehensive in the industry decades before film preservation became fashionable. He understood that memory was power, and that the industry had a habit of erasing what no longer served it. He documented fallen stars, lost films, banned footage. Some in the industry found it strange. Some found it threatening. McDowell wasn't ahead of his time in front of the camera. He was ahead of it behind the lens, building a legacy, not for himself, but for the truth. Fact #6, Lillian Gish. She helped invent cinema, but fought her whole life to protect it. Lillian Gish wasn't just an actress. She was there when cinema was born, working with D.W. Griffith in the silent era. Gish helped define visual storytelling, crafting gestures, pacing, and emotion before film even had sound. But she wasn't content to be a relic. In an era where actresses faded with age, Gish pushed for creative control. She negotiated contracts, fought for artistic integrity, spoke out against censorship and commercial dilution. She saw film not as business but as art, and that made her dangerous. By mid-century, Hollywood had turned to spectacle. Gish was considered outdated. They respected her legacy, but not her voice. She remained a purist until the end, writing essays, teaching, archiving history no one else wanted to remember. Today, we revere her image, but for most of her life, her ideas were dismissed as stubbornness. In truth, she wasn't resisting change, she was resisting the erosion of meaning. Fact #7, Donald Sutherland. He refused to separate performance from politics. Donald Sutherland had the face of a leading man and the fire of a dissenter. In the 1,970 seconds, when most actors carefully avoided controversy, Sutherland stood beside Jane Fonda, protesting the Vietnam War. He didn't just march, he organized. He filmed anti-war sketches for soldiers. He confronted the system that made him famous. Hollywood responded with discomfort. Though never blacklisted outright, Sutherland saw opportunities vanish. He was too intense, too ideological, too strange, yet he kept working, often in roles that mirrored his defiance. From Clute to MASH*, he embodied men at odds with authority. His performances were subtle. His politics were not. He never tried to charm the industry. He tried to challenge it. And while his contributions are now seen as heroic, at the time, they made him expendable. Fact #1 of 8, Gloria Swanson. She didn't just survive the system, she dared to outgrow it. Most silent film stars faded when the talkies came. Not Gloria Swanson. She didn't just adapt, she transformed. Swanson became one of the first women to produce her own films, investing her own money, making creative decisions that male moguls typically controlled. In 1928, she released Sadie Thompson, tackling sexual hypocrisy with boldness rarely seen even today. The industry was confused, threatened. Swanson was supposed to be an ornament, not a decision-maker. She took risks. Some flopped, some triumphed, but she always owned them. Years later, in Sunset Boulevard, she gave a performance so raw, so meta, it became her legacy. But it also overshadowed her real life as a businesswoman, innovator, and survivor of Hollywood's most ruthless era. She once said, "I've given my memoirs far more thought than any of my marriages." That line wasn't just wit, it was a warning. Fact #9, James Baldwin. He rewrote what stories could mean before the screen was ready to listen. James Baldwin wasn't a movie star. He didn't need to be. His pen reshaped America's moral conscience, and Hollywood feared that. A novelist, essayist, and speaker, Baldwin dissected race, sexuality, masculinity, and religion with scalpel precision. His voice was lyrical, furious, clear. When the industry flirted with adapting his work, it pulled back at the last minute. Too political, too queer, too black, too truthful. He wrote screenplays that went unmade, stories that demanded discomfort, characters who defied Hollywood's binary systems. And for years, he watched as lesser truths filled the screen. When asked why he didn't tone it down, Baldwin said, "You want me to make it palatable. I want it to be real." Today, his essays are quoted in Oscar speeches. But while he lived, the very stage that now praises him remained off-limits. He wasn't ignored because he was hard to read. He was ignored because he was impossible to sanitize. Fact #20, Montgomery Clift. He changed acting forever but couldn't change the world around him. Before Brando, before De Niro, there was Montgomery Clift. He introduced America to something radical, vulnerability. While others posed, he trembled. He brought the method to the screen not as technique but as revelation. His performances felt lived in, broken, human, but Hollywood only wanted part of him. Clift was gay, soft-spoken, intellectual. He rejected the studio persona, refused arranged dates, turned down safe roles. After a near-fatal car crash, his face changed, but he kept acting, even as producers tried to shelve him like damaged goods. They called it the longest suicide in Hollywood. What it really was, a slow, painful rebellion against everything artificial. He never won an Oscar. He never fit in. But his influence lingers in every performance that dares to show pain instead of pride. Montgomery Clift didn't just act ahead of his time. He felt ahead of his time and paid dearly for it. Bonus fact, the unknown pioneers. Some were so ahead of their time, history didn't even bother to remember them. For every name we've spoken, there are dozens more we can't. Not because they weren't brave, not because they weren't brilliant, but because Hollywood erased them before they could leave a mark. The actresses who refused the casting couch and were never called back. The actors who lived openly and were quietly dropped. The screenwriters whose stories didn't pass. The gatekeepers. The cinematographers, editors, and assistants who brought radical ideas to set only to be replaced with safer hands. They never got a headline, never got a statue. Some never even got a second credit. They weren't ahead of their time by choice. They were simply honest in a system that rewards performance, not principle. And so, this bonus fact isn't about one forgotten pioneer. It's about the silent army of them. The ones who slipped between the reels, who walked so others could run, who ran and were tripped. History doesn't record all of them. But if you watch closely between the frames, behind the credits, you'll feel their fingerprints. Hollywood's golden age wasn't just glitter and gold. It was also silence, resistance, and the quiet pain of being too far ahead of your time. These 20 stars didn't just entertain, they provoked, they challenged, they dared to exist outside the frame and paid the price for it. But now, we remember, not with nostalgia, with responsibility, because the real question isn't just who was erased. It's whether we're still doing the erasing just with different tools. Which of these stories struck you the most? And who else do you believe was ahead of their time, but never got the spotlight? Tell us in the comments below. Let's make sure they're not forgotten again.